Hi everybody, welcome to a Halloween special tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to cover a few different things. The main kind of point of this video is to show how to use point deform and getting a vellum to work on an animated object, on an animated input geometry. Um, so we're going to just jump right into that. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and prepare our geometry. And how we're going to do that is we're going to go to Mixamo, which is a free website. And I've just got one character here with this zombie walk. It's 121 frames, which is good for us. Keep it nice and short. And then I'm just going to click download. And then FBX, change this to 24 frames a second. With skin and keyframe reduction to none and hit download. I've already got this kind of downloaded, so I'm not going to hit the download button. I'm going to go ahead and open up Houdini. Okay, here we are in Houdini. First things we need to do is get our character in here. So what we're going to do is make a geo container, and we'll just call this character 1. And jump in there, and then we're going to lay down an FBX character import. And this is a really great node that does a lot of stuff for us. So for the FBX file, I'm just going to go ahead and click here and go to my downloads and zombie walk FBX and hit accept. Now we should see this. You'll notice it's not animating yet. We need one more step for that. We need to just add a bone deform. And select, and there we go. We have our walking zombie. And since I know this is 100 and such odd frames, we'll just go to 100 frames. So I'm going to make my end frame here 100 frames, so we're not simming stuff we don't have to. Get our camera in here, and I think we're pretty much good to go for a setup. Let's go ahead and just create a null and call this car1 underscore out and set that to our out. And we jump back up to object level and make a geo container, and we'll just call this simulation or sim. Jump in there. So we just need to get our object in. So what we'll do next, mouse is messing up, is we'll throw down object merge. So here is our object merge, and we're just going to go find that output and all that we made and hit accept. So now we've got our character in here, which is exactly what we want. Next thing we need to do is we're going to need a rest pose to run a Vellum sim on this. And the reason why that is if we try to remesh this and get rid of all this detail around here, we're going to get random points on every frame, and we can't really simulate that. So the way around that is to just get a rest point. And to do that, we just use a time shift node. There's a time shift, right click on frame and hit delete channels, and that's it. Now when we hit play, we'll see we've got that frozen frame. This ghost image back there is just our other geometry, which we'll turn off for now. So now you can see as we play back, we've got a frozen character, which is what we need. So the next thing we need to do with this is convert this into a proxy geometry. We don't want to have to simulate all of the detail of like the face and the teeth and things like that. We don't want to have to simulate that. It'll just take too much time. So what we need to do is make a proxy object, and we do that by using a VDB. So we type in VDB, and we're going to do a VDB from polygons and highlight that. You'll see we get this kind of weird image. Basically what a VDB is, it's a bunch of little voxels and that approximates a 3D space. So we'll go up to our voxel size, and we need a little bit more resolution. And this works as a smaller number is higher resolution. So we'll put 01, and that should be enough. We're just looking for enough to actually drive the main parts of the character. We're losing the fingers a little bit, so let's try 0.008. And that works. That should work just fine. And we can always go back and up-res that. So once we have that, we need to convert this to polygons. So we'll just type in convert VDB, select that, go up to convert to, polygons. Now we've got a polygonal object, as we can see here. We really definitely want to remesh this if we're going to run a VDB sim. So we have nice even triangles. We don't really want to sim on this kind of geometry. To do that, we're just going to go ahead and do a remesh. And in our remesh shop, we'll go in here to target size and just start lowering this. And we want a good enough amount to simulate, but not too much that it's going to run slow. And that should work. And if you make it too high, too low res, we can always come back and change this number. No big deal at all. All right, so that sets up our main object for simulation. Next up, let's talk about point deforms. Okay, so now that we've got our static, non-moving, non-animated remeshed object here, we want to get motion in this because the whole point of what we're trying to do is to simulate something that's already in motion. So how do we get motion back onto this object? Well, it's very easy to do that. We use what's called a point deform. So just zooming in here. The point deform requires 3 different inputs. It requires mesh to deform, the rest point lattice, and the last one is the deform point lattice. So looking here, we can say, okay, what would be the mesh that we want to deform? That mesh would be the one that's not moving right now, right? So that would be the remesh. So we'll plug the remesh in here. And the second one is the rest point lattice. So where is our rest point being generated from? It's being generated right here in the time shift. So we're going to plug that in there. And the next thing we need is the deformed point lattice. This last one right here. And for that, we're going to use our object right here above the time shift. And we're going to plug that in and select it. Now we should see our character moving again. Wonderful. It's a really great node. So now that we've got this point deform, we can go ahead and get set up for our Vellum Sim. Okay, here we go to the next step before our Vellum simulation is we're going to set up an attribute. And we're going to use a new node called attribute paint. This node is really cool. And basically, we won't get into any of this right just a second. I want to show you the paint features first. So we'll have the attribute node selected. Now in the viewport, if I hit enter, you can see we go into a paint mode. And basically how I like to remember this is anything that's purple will get our Vellum simulation. Anything that's not will get the rest pose the point deform here. So let's go ahead and just let's make sure his legs aren't deforming, and we'll just let the upper body be deformed. So if I just click and drag with the left mouse button, we'll go through this super easy. We can use the scroll wheel to make the brush tip bigger. And I'm just going to check through this. And it looks good. We'll go a little bit higher. Or maybe not. To erase, all we have to do is hit Control, middle mouse click. There we go. That's what I want. And that's it. That's all we have to do for the attribute paint. Next up, let's go ahead and jump into Vellum. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and do our Vellum simulation. So the first thing we need to do is drop down a Vellum constraint right here. And we're going to do all of this manually. There are ways that you can right-click and set up a Vellum to configure and get some of these pre-made constraints. But we're going to be building all of our constraints kind of from scratch for this. So other than the first constraint, which we're going to use is cloth. So if we go down here, I'm going to do just CLOTH. We have this Vellum configure cloth. So we'll drop that down, and that's just our first node. And this just puts in some presets for us so we don't have to spend a lot of time doing that. The next thing we have to do is add a pin constraint. And the pin constraint is basically going to allow this geometry to not just fold in on itself. And to show you what I mean, I'm going to go ahead and just simulate this as is. So I just grabbed a Vellum solver, tab VES, Vellum solver, and go to frame 1, and we'll go down here, and we'll just see what we get. And we got some random falling, so let's add a ground plane, and then we'll go ahead. So boom, we just get some cloth, basically. Our object just falls apart to cloth. So obviously we don't want that. We want our geometry to follow along with the animation. And the key to that is using what we call the pin constraint, or what is called the pin constraint. So we'll drop down another Vellum constraints. And in here, up at the constraint type, we're going to select pin to target. So what this gives us is we have this pin to animation object option under this Vellum constraint. So all we have to do is go over here, go to soft, the orientation type, set to soft, and hit match animation. And then we get this stiffness right here. And this is basically how much our geometry is affected by this soft pin. So we'll just use the default for now. Oh, we dropped that below the Vellum solver. We got a bit above there. My mistake. All right, so we'll go here and we'll simulate and see what we get. We can see that our animation is following the pin pretty much dead on. There's not much give in that, which is totally fine for now. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this pin constraint and just see what we get. So right now we have a stiffness set to 1, and it says 1e plus 10. So let's lower this down to say 10 and see what we get. Okay, so basically what we need to do is get this pin constraint to be a lot looser. So let's try, we'll just go all the way down to -10 and see what we get. And there we go. That's kind of what we were expecting. There's a little bit of volume in there, but not much. So let's go back up to this pin, and let's just put this at, say, 0.01 and see what we get with that. That might be enough. There we go. So now we're getting some jiggle in there, but it's still being kind of really directed by the animation. So we set that attribute up here. So how can we access that paint that we did with our simulation. So first thing we want to do is click on attributes for this attribute paint, and let's change this mask to effect, just so we know what we're doing here. And when I do that, it's going to get rid of my paint, so I'm just going to paint this back in again, just real quick. When you set that up yourself, if you just put effect in and hit enter, you won't have to do this twice. So also in our pen constraint, let's go ahead and this number here, the stiffness number, let's control that with an attribute. So we'll go scale by attribute. Sorry, scale by both is what we want, because we want to use the attribute and then we want to be able to dial that number in as well. So the attribute paint was in effect. So let's see what we get with this. There we go. So now, as you can see, the upper body has completely gone to jelly, and walking along with these legs like so, which could be a cool effect if you wanted it. But say you want a little bit more of the influence of the animation in that upper body. That's what we have that scale for right here. So for now, let's go ahead, let's try scale 2 and see what we get. Oof, it's still very loose. So I think what we need to do is add a little bit more of our original animation here, of the actual geometry volume back in. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and add a struts, a Vellum struts. Hopefully that just gives us, yeah, just the one node. That we shouldn't have to really dial anything in on this. Let's just see what we get now. There we go. So it's now falling, but it's not collapsing in on itself, which is a pretty cool effect. So let's go ahead and dial in this pen again. So let's just set this up to 10. Let's see what happens. I'm just kind of free flowing at this point and just kind of seeing what kind of effects we can get. So it's staying a little bit further off the ground, and he's kind of leaning back, which this effect is actually pretty cool. So I think we're gonna stick with that effect. So since we've got that kind of effect, just the zombie going here, let's go ahead and try to just go like full on Cronenberg. Let's make them really crazy looking. And to do that, we'll just use a pressure constraint. So type in VEC for our Vellum constraints, like this. Then we'll go up to our constraint type, and we will set this to pressure. And what pressure does is it gives us this, it's basically like a stretch stiffness, and this rest length scale. And the rest length scale is a stretch, if you read right here, it's stretch rest scale. And if we increase this number, we can get some ballooning effects. So let's go ahead and let's try a value of 5 just to start off with and see what we get. And there we go. Wild creature effect. So doing that by hand would take a lot of time, to be honest. And this is a really cool way to experiment. So let's go back to our pressure. Let's just go nuts and have this scale up to 10. There we go. Now I've got some really crazy motion going on. And this pressure constraint can also be animated over time, which I'm going to do a separate video about that. But for now, we'll just call this pretty cool. So let's dial this back a little bit because I want our textures to still be able to match up, and this would stretch the texture out. You'd have to do some pretty special stuff to get the color back on. But let's go ahead and just see if we can get a little bit. There we go. That's still going to stretch the textures a lot, but I'm fine with that. I think this will work. Okay, maybe a little less. Let's see here. Go back to our pen. Let's scale this back to like a 2. That might not be enough, but we'll see. Wow, that's super crazy looking. All right, let's see if we can just dial this back a little bit more. Let's go down to our pressure here. Let's just do like 1.5, and then with our pen, we'll just set this to 1.5 as well for that multiplier. Now let's see what we get. There we go. Now the legs are at least sticking in a proper direction. He's kind of just like half zombified. So that works. All right. So enough of that. Let's go ahead and we're going to do one last point deform and call it a day for this tutorial. So let's go ahead and make another point deform. And as we said before, let's go ahead and look at what we got. So the first thing we're going to need is right here, this mesh to deform. And that will be our, excuse me, that will be up here at our time shift. Drop that down here. And then our second one will be after our remesh, right here. And then the last one, it'll go into our point deform. So now we've got our texture back on here. Just switch on smooth shade. Since it's Halloween, let's go ahead and set this to a dark background. And see our final animation here. Whoa, crazy. And that is going to wrap up this tutorial. Thank you, everyone.